Over the next 6 weeks, we're going to look at snapshots from key events that take place on a 40-hour timeline as the clock ticks down to Christ's death on the cross. We're going to look at the betrayal. We're going to look at the arrest, the trials that took place. We're going to look at how he went into a Jewish court and a Roman court. We're going to look at how he was crucified. We're going to talk about that Friday, how Jesus was suspended between heaven and earth on a cross, what that really means. Talk about the burial and the resurrection of Jesus, what we celebrate Easter. As believers, I believe it's important for you and I to have a basic understanding of the chronological order of events surrounding Jesus' death, his resurrection, and even his ascension. Because in the events that take place that we're going to look at on this timeline, there are some things that I believe are going to power up your faith. I believe there's a couple things that we're going to point out over the next few weeks I believe sometime are overlooked as we approach Easter that are going to amaze you. And in the process, it's going to confirm Jesus was who he said he is. Today is going to be an introduction to this teaching series, Countdown to the Crucifixion. And we'll finish as we celebrate Easter. Are you excited about Easter? You should be excited. We should have Easter excitement every day in our hearts, really. We're going to use today as the introduction to briefly summarize. I want to summarize some events that took place in that 40 hours leading up to Jesus' death. And then we're going to start on the timeline. We'll dig deep into what took place in the garden today and tomorrow. Or not tomorrow. Well, if I go a long time, you'll be here tomorrow. Chile people were here 2 days, so I guess we can stay 2 days. I wonder if that would work if I could give you guys an excuse from work saying, well, the preacher went long, man. We all stayed. I wonder if that would be accepted. I just need a note, right? All right, so we're going to look at the garden. We're going to look at the trials. We're going to look at the beating. We're really going to hone in on that cat of nine tails. It's the whip of nine tails, however you want to call it. Because there's something there, I believe, that's really overlooked at times. And we're going to dig into that 3 weeks from now. So let's put our timeline under the microscope, and then we'll finish up with some thoughts on the Garden of Gethsemane. Our timeline starts this way. Jesus and his disciples, they're ascending up to a second-floor, nondescript room in the middle of downtown Jerusalem. You guys all know the story. If you've been in church any length of time, they're going to sit down around a big old table. There's paintings about it. And they're going to have what's known as the last meal together on this side of Jesus' death. This is the last intake of nourishment, protein, whatever you want to say that Jesus is going to have before he goes and walks to the cross and dies for us. T-minus 40 hours to the cross. Jesus is in the upper room. This is the first stop on our timeline. This actually kicks off the timeline in earnest. We can find out what takes place when you look at John chapter 13, verses 1 through 20. I'm going to read 4 verses. We're not going to really park here on this first stop on the timeline during this teaching series. Actually, we won't start really digging into this timeline until we get to the third stop, but I want to walk you through the stops this morning. Let's start reading first here in John chapter 13, verses 1 through 4. Now, before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. During supper, when the devil had already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going back to God, rose from supper, laid aside his outer garments, taking a towel, tied it around his waist. Now, I want to stop right here. We're not going to read all the verses. I'm just going to give you the snapshots of what took place in the upper room, and then we're going to start moving down this timeline. Jesus washed the feet of his disciples as a sign of as servant leadership. He's doing that as a sign of the ultimate humility. Only Jesus could do something like that, because I sure couldn't. I just don't like feet. And so he got down there and he scrubbed the feet, nasty, muddy feet of his disciples, to include the very one, the guy who's going to give him a Judas kiss down the road. He announced to them that one would betray him. Later on in this time together, he tells Judas, hey, go and get busy about what you're doing. Go make history, buddy, for the wrong reasons. Judas leaves. A new ordinance is given to the church that we still partake in today, the Lord's Supper. Jesus seizes this opportunity in the upper room to teach his disciples what theologians call now the upper room discourse. They finish their meal, they pray, they sing, and they go right back down the very steps that they went up to go into the upper room. The disciples and Jesus leave the upper room, walk out into the empty streets of Jerusalem, and as their feet hit Main Street, Jerusalem, and as they point themselves toward the Kidron Valley to the Garden of Gethsemane, the clock on this T- to the cross hits 39 hours. 39 hours to the cross. Now you got to remember, the city is filled with pilgrims from all across the Roman Empire, Jews who descend on Jerusalem for the Passover. This is one of 3 required travel feasts for the nation of Israel. You must go to these 3 travel feasts unless you're infirmed. You can't go because you're sick, you're in the military, something like that. You can get a pass, but if not, you must go. This city is filled to capacity. Airbnb, before Airbnb was a thing, all the rooms in Jerusalem are rented out. Packed. Filled with people celebrating the Passover. This is the backdrop. I want you to understand this. Jesus is taking his first steps to the cross. And in the background, you hear laughter, there's joy, there's celebration from all the windows that are out there of the rooms. People are having a big time. Streets are empty. People are celebrating. Family haven't seen each other in a long time. And Jesus is walking down the street. The backdrop of joy, his heart is heavy. His heart is heavy because he knows what's going to happen very soon. Jesus and his disciples walk these empty streets filled with laughter and joy. They leave the city. They start heading out toward what's known as the Kidron Valley, heading toward the Mount of Olives. In the center of the Mount of Olives is located the Garden of Gethsemane. Who's heard of that before? Elvis even sings about it. Walking in the garden or something, right? What does Gethsemane mean? And what is Gethsemane? We hear about it in church, but do we really know what it means and where it's at and what went on there? The word Gethsemane means oil press. It is a place where people would press oil. It was also the garden, the way it was in the first century at Jesus' time, was a place that people would go and they would pray, they would reflect, they would meditate. Also in the Garden of Gethsemane, right there on the slope of the Mount of Olives, there were caves. In fact, next week we'll talk about Jesus in one of these caves as he's arrested. But in the caves around the Garden of Gethsemane, you find graves. Caves served as graves back then in the first century for the Hebrew people. So this was a funeral, or not a funeral home, it was a graveyard as well. This is a place where Jesus went to often to pray, to think, to meditate, to reflect. He took his disciples there. Now, as they are walking to the Garden of Gethsemane, the second stop on our timeline takes place in one of the many vineyards that surround the Garden of Gethsemane, the Mount of Olives, located in the Kidron Valley. And Jesus teaches one of my favorite teachings. Picture this. Jesus is going to the cross. He's about to die in a mere 30-something hours. And he stops his disciples under the light of the moon, pulls back some branches, points down to where the vine meets the branch, and looks at them and says, I'm the vine, you're the branch. And he gives them some important teaching on how to abide in him, because Jesus knew that these men are going to be sifted like wheat. They're going to be put in a pressure cooker in the weeks and years to come. And if they don't understand how to abide in him, they will never make it. Jesus' heart is heavy. Think about it. He knows that he's going to have to taste sin for the first time. But yet he loves his disciples enough to give them some of the most important teaching I believe they received. Third stop on the way to the cross is in the Garden of Gethsemane. T-minus 37 hours to the cross. We're not going to talk about that right now because I'm going to come around. We're going to talk about the Garden of Gethsemane before we leave today. The fourth stop on the way to the cross, Jesus' betrayal and arrest. A cohort of soldiers, we'll talk about that next week, show up to arrest this man, Jesus. T-minus 36 hours to the cross. Jesus is led away by an angry mob from the Garden of Gethsemane, heading back to the very city he just left, Jerusalem. Jesus experienced over the next few hours many trials. Stops 5 through 9 on our timeline go like this. Jesus appeared before the high priest. Stop number 6, Jesus is drugged before the Sanhedrin. Stop number 7, he appears before Pilate. Stop number 8, he's drugged before Herod. Stop number 9, back to Pontius Pilate, who does a very political move. Don't think your politicians nowadays are wishy-washy. They've always been wishy-washy. He says, I can't find any fault in him. Instead of taking a stand, he says, what do you want me to do, crowd? And this angry, bloodthirsty mob starts screaming, crucify him, free Barabbas. Hey, free the rapist, free the murderer, and put this innocent guy on the cross, is what this angry mob was saying. He is released to this crowd with Roman guards who specialize in the torture and killing of individuals on the cross. You've got to remember, this isn't just soldiers. These are highly trained, highly motivated experts in killing people on the cross. These guys were deterrents to war. They would go crucify people out before they would attack and say, if you don't surrender, this is what we're going to do to you. And these guys were experts at killing. They're the ones that put their hands on your Savior. T-minus 8 hours to the cross. These angry soldiers with death on their mind lead our innocent Jesus away. 2 hours to the cross. Jesus is crucified. As he's lifted up and that cross is put into the ground in a violent way, the way the Roman soldiers were trained to do, there's 6 hours till Jesus dies. We'll get into that in detail in 3 or 4 weeks. The clock has now struck 0, 0, 0, 1. Jesus exhales for the last time. It's finished. Those words should mean something to you. It's finished. They should mean something to me. Jesus is taken down from the cross. A man named Joseph of Arimathea took custody of Jesus' body. That's a historical fact. You can read about it in Roman records. Joseph takes and prepares Jesus' body according to Jewish customs. Jesus is then laid in the Arimathea family tomb. It's over. From all earthly aspects, it's over. Does the story end there? No, it doesn't. According to historical records and according to Scripture, 3 days, Jesus walks out of the tomb, does this, looks death in the face, and says, I beat you. I beat you. If you can't clap at that, then you'll clap for a touchdown for Clemson. Hey, but guess what happened at that moment? Another clock started ticking. There's a clock ticking right now for Jesus' glorious appearing. You know, I don't know when that, I can't give you the countdown on that one. I don't know when it's going to strike 0-0, but I can't wait. All right, so that's your timeline that we're going to go by in this teaching series. I want you to remember that. It's important. So let's go ahead and pivot to that third stop. Let's just go ahead and fast forward, if you will, right up to that third stop. You remember what the third? Here's your first pop quiz question. Okay. Where's the third stop at? The garden. Yeah, you go see. Give her a round of applause. No, I'll give you the trick questions. There you go. Let's go ahead and read out of Luke. Let's see what's happening in the garden. We're going to go to Luke chapter 22, verse 39 through 46, okay? And he came out and went as his custom to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples followed him. And when he came to the place, he said to them, pray that you may not enter into temptation. And Jesus he withdrew about a stone's throw. For you, Corey, in the back, that'd be about a gap wedge. And he said, hey, I'm going to lay down and pray. He gets down and he prays. Jesus says, Father, these are big words. I want you to listen to this. Something epic going on right here in these next few words. Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done. And hey, ladies in the Wednesday night group, this verse is for you. And there appeared to him an angel from heaven, strengthening him. Those of you who are in the Wednesday night class know. And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. And when he rose from prayer, he came to the disciples and found them what? Sleeping. How many times have we fell asleep at the wheel? Spiritually. We can't criticize these guys. We might do the same thing. And he said to them, why are you sleeping? Rise and pray, that you may not enter into temptation. Let's unpack some of these verses here. Remember, this is a place where Jesus regularly went to pray. He regularly went here to reflect, think, and meditate. In fact, there's documented in Scripture where Jesus took his disciples there to pray with him, not just this one. So this is a place that Jesus liked to go and pray. And here's a takeaway that I want to throw out to you. You and I need a place to pray. We need a special place that we can go when we're facing difficult situations. It doesn't have to be a closet in your house. It could be just a place that you go to where you can get alone with God. It could be out in your yard. It could be anywhere. But we need a special place to pray. We see here Jesus modeling this by going to the Garden of Gethsemane. He could have went many places in the city of Jerusalem that would have had significance for what's about to take place. It would have been great allegory there as well. But he chose a place that he was familiar with, that he was comfortable with, and that he has gone to many times to talk to God the Father. When the chips are down, When the going was getting tough for our Savior, he went to his personal, what we would call nowadays a prayer closet, which makes me ask, do you have a special place that you go to and pray? Because you need one. Jesus is modeling this here. There is a reason behind it. We'll get into that later. We'll go back to the garden. Right here in verse 39 through 46, in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus is experiencing intense agony of the soul. 36 hours to the cross is weighing heavy on Jesus' mind. It's weighing heavy on Jesus' heart. Remember, we have the hypostatic union in play here. Jesus is fully God, and Jesus is fully man. And we're looking right here in the Garden of Gethsemane. A spotlight is being shown right on top of Jesus being fully man. He's asking his daddy, saying, Daddy, please make another way. Take this from me. It's more than I can bear. Take this cup. Jesus is begging for this to be done a different way. But Jesus is fully God. He knows it can't. He knows he must fulfill his mission for redemption. Verse 44. I want us to look at two words because I don't believe these two English words paint the picture that's going on that we need to understand. And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly. And big sweat drops started to materialize. I want you to, when you think of Jesus in the garden, do you think of that picture where he's on that big rock doing this? You know that painting that depicts Christ in the garden? He's on a big boulder and he's got his hands crossed and he's praying. Nothing could be further from the truth than that painting when you look at the Greek right here. Agony comes from the Greek word agone, which is a military term for a wrestling match, grappling, a struggle. Watch Jesus struggling with. He's struggling with the hypostatic union. He's struggling with being fully God, and he's struggling with being fully man. This grappling is taking place because Jesus is fighting his human will, his instinct to cut and run, his instinct to leave the hardness behind, to take an easy road. Jesus is battling the mind. How many of you in here today are fighting something within your mind? You're struggling with something. You're struggling with the situation you face. You're grappling back and forth. Jesus has been there. This word earnestly comes from a Greek word that means, who in here has ever been in so much pain you can't find a place that gets comfortable? You move from here, you move from there, you stand up, you lay down, you roll around, you do whatever it takes to relieve pain. That's what that word means. There is no way, according to these two Greek words, that painting depicting Jesus sitting there like this up next to a stone praying, take this cup from me. He is rolling around on the ground in pain, crying out to his God, to his Father, saying, please remove this from me. Satan is hoping and Satan is wishing that Jesus will give way to his human side and walk away. Angels on this side from heaven watching, hushed-mouthed. What's he going to do? Angels from the enemy side over here going, do it, do it, do it, do it. This was no ordinary prayer. This was a battle prayer. And this tells me that there's times when we need to go to battle in our prayer, where just praying is not going to be simply enough. You got to take it and treat it like an enemy that must be conquered. Jesus was stretched beyond anything that he could take humanly. But you know what? Jesus didn't break. He didn't run. He didn't give up. And if you're facing something that is stretching you, it's bending you, you should go into battle prayer. Don't give up. Follow Jesus' example. Because right here in the Garden of Gethsemane, we find something important. And here's a takeaway. When you're pushed to the limit, when you're battling, when you feel abandoned, prayer makes a difference. Now, when I say makes a difference, it makes a difference. It doesn't mean that it's going to be removed. It doesn't mean that you get a pass on what you're facing. It just simply means that that prayer is going to produce confidence, it's going to produce courage, and it's going to produce peace in the process. Jesus is struggling emotionally. He is struggling mentally. He is struggling spiritually here in the garden. He's pushed to the limit that a human can bear. He's squirming mentally. He's squirming emotionally. He's seeking relief from God the Father. This internal fight was so severe that blood started to pour from his body. This is our final thought this morning. These moments in Gethsemane were so intense that according to verse 44, Jesus started to sweat the way it puts it, blood. What does that mean? I want to mention this to you because this is important. Because when we get to about 7 hours to the cross in a few weeks, I'm going to bring you back to this moment and tell you something that I find amazing. The English word here from the Greek means clotting blood. It's not metaphor. Leave it to Dr. Luke, the physician, to point out a medical phenomenon taking place. There's no mistakes in the Bible. Think about how God works. He's letting Luke, the doctor, tell us about something that is medical, a medical phenomenon, a medical condition. Over the years, theologians said, oh, it just appeared to be blood. Wrong. This is a very rare condition. You can look it up in the Journal of American Medical Association. It's happened a few times in the modern era. I believe there's two conditions out there that will cause you to bleed this way. I believe the one I'm going to tell you about is the one Jesus experienced because of the great emotional pressure that he was under. See, there's a medical phenomena that's like a word this long. So I'm not going to embarrass myself and try to say it until I listen to it a few more times and can say it to you. But it's oxomycostasis. Something like that. Just know it's big. This is why I can explain what happens. In extreme cases, your brain, which is a powerful thing, starts to imagine that you're in a vice because you're under such intense pressure emotionally. You're under such intense pressure spiritually. You're under intense pressure mentally. And your brain tells the body that it's in a vice and there's pressure coming in on it. And the brain actually believes that this vice is going to squeeze the body to death. So the body and the brain goes into what's called survival mode. And what the brain will do to the human body, if it actually believes it's being pressurized to the point of death, it starts to separate the top layer of skin from the second layer of skin, and it fills it with blood, the brain thinking that that's going to offset the pressure. And so this is what I believe is happening in Jesus' life here in the Garden of Gethsemane. He's suffering so much mentally. He's anguishing, agoneo. He's over here in the word we looked at for earnestly. These things are taking place and it's pressuring on his mind. His skin comes apart. And when this happens during this medical phenomenon, blood goes in between those layers. And blood has to come out. And it comes out through sweat glands, and it comes out through tear ducts. Jesus was under so much pressure. His human side went into survival mode. Separated the skin, filled it with blood, and now we see him sweating drops of blood as he prays in the garden. In the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus won the will, or I guess you could say it this way, Jesus won the war of will. He pushed the human will aside, tapped into the will of God, and moved forward, completely submitting to the cross of Calvary. Your last takeaway. Whatever it is you're facing, whatever it is that keeps you up at night, whatever struggle you're going through, you can win the war like Christ. A little known fact, something that we preachers fail to mention about the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus walks up to wake up his disciples after this intense moment that he just experienced, and he's a bloody mess. His clothes are filled with blood from what he pushed out through his sweat glands. There's blood dripping off of his beard. His hair's bloody. He's sweating from every hole that can put out blood. So before he's even arrested, before they beat him for the first time, his disciples see him a bloody mess. I'm going to tell you the significance of that in 3 weeks. I want you to think about this, these thoughts that we just had. I want you to think this. There's going to be times when you and I are put through pressure. Obviously, it's not like the pressure Christ is experiencing in the garden, but pressure's pressure. Difficult situations are difficult situations. And there's going to be time that you're bleeding out metaphorically, just like Jesus here in the garden. You're going to learn in about 4 weeks from now, this very event is something that preserved Christ's life so he could get to the cross. So that means in these moments when we're under intense pressure, and you may be metaphorically bleeding out through every sweat gland you have, Christ is doing that to preserve you to get to something that you're called to fulfill. To get you to something maybe even better than what you're in right now. But you have to go through that pressure moment to get there. I'd ask you to bow your heads. If you think about what we just talked about. Do you have a place that you can retreat to and pray? That you would find comfort in when you're having to wrestle with God under intense pressure? If not, you need to find one. When you're pushed to the limit of everything that you think you can humanly, spiritually, mentally, physically, whatever the case may be, bear, when you're battling, maybe you feel abandoned, prayer makes a difference. It will produce the confidence that you need. It will provide you the courage to get you through. Most important, it will give you the peace that passes all understanding. Now, if you say, Pastor Jai, I need prayer this morning, I'm not even going to give you a laundry list. If you just say, pray for me, it's urgent, raise your hand so I can pray for you. I see hands go up all over. You can put them down. God, for the ones who have lifted their hands today, Lord, I pray that the Holy Spirit will comfort them, guide them, and fill them. I pray, Lord, that they will go to a place of prayer, confidently come before you, and just bear their soul honestly like Jesus was doing in the garden. No pretense, no fancy words. Hey, I'm a mess. Please take this away. The worship team's going to sing for a minute. If you would like special prayer, if you would like to talk to me or an elder or whatever, now would be the time to make your move. If you feel this on your heart's door and you don't make a move, the next time it'll be a little lighter, and then there won't be any more. That's the way it works. Do what the Lord is calling you to do. Pray right where you're standing if that's good. Make the decision to move forward.